And I'd like to introduce now David Murphy. We've kind of started down the track. We started out more about talking about blockchain. I have a feeling we're going to have an additional talk about a digital currency because his talk is all about Dash. So I'm interested to hear if he's going to evangelize a little bit about Dash and what his thoughts are. And if he has anything interesting he wants to share, with us about himself, I'd like to hear that too.
Yeah, you wonder if I'm going to evangelize because I got the long hair. All right, people, I'm here to tell you about Dash Digital Cash. Hallelujah. Woo! All right. This is a magazine ad from 1972, and it's got the very clever tagline there, think of it as money. And do you know why they're telling you to think of it as money? Because nobody would think of it as money. It's a piece of plastic. Now, this is technology, right? This is a technology ad from 1972, but this is the interesting fact about this. The credit card, in this case, the Bank AmeriCard credit card from Bank of America, which started in California, it went across the states, went across the globe, went on to become Visa. The technology had already been around since 1958 when the Bank AmeriCard hit the market. 14 years later, the advertisers are still trying to get you to think of it as money because nobody was thinking of it like that. How does plastic equal money? And that's the same with cryptocurrency, right? But we're not even barely a decade in on this from when Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he, they, she is, introduced Bitcoin. And it's had a very storied history so far. I'll go through some of these funny articles. I like this one, The Rise and Fall of Bitcoin. And this was published in 2011. That year, Bitcoin went from about $2 to somewhere north of 30, and it crashed back down to about $2 by the time this article was written. The rise and fall of Bitcoin. A couple years later, it was the year of the Bitcoin. It's back. This was at the end of 2013. Within just 2 months, we'd have the most massive of all, Mt. Gox debacles, which just all that crypto is stolen. Somebody brought that up earlier. And then my favorite, I was wrong about Bitcoin. Here's why. This article, the author had been kind of poo-pooing Bitcoin. Oh, what's Bitcoin? I was wrong. It's an amazing thing. The technology, a peer-to-peer, decentralized cash. Yeah, this was December 2017. If you know anything about the market, this was a bad time to read that article and decide to get on board because you would have gotten wrecked. But what was Bitcoin supposed to be? Peer-to-peer digital cash. Cash is freedom, in a sense. Yes, sure, you can do nefarious things. You know what the dirtiest money of all of it is the US dollar. That is the dirtiest currency. That's where the most money laundering, drug dealing, bribery and stuff goes on. It's not Bitcoin. Bitcoin, the market cap on this is barely what? 200 billion? It's nothing. This is what you hear it now. This has been the co-opting of Bitcoin by the market forces and by the media. Now it's not digital cash anymore. It's not a peer-to-peer money. It's gold 2.0. It's a store of value. And that may very well be what it ends up functioning as, and that would be fine. Kind of makes me think of this meme. That's sort of a perfect descriptor of it. Did you ever see that movie? He's like, Anakin's on the lake of fire. You were supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them. And that's kind of what Bitcoin is doing right now. But I'm not here to talk about Bitcoin. I'm here to talk about Dash. And the best way to do that is to make a direct comparison with Dash against Bitcoin because they're both cryptocurrencies. I'll begin with the limited supply. So with Bitcoin, you have a limit of 21 million Bitcoin that can ever be created. It's around 21 million because some Bitcoin will have been lost on somebody's hard drive and dumped in the landfill, or they sent the money to a wrong address and it got burned or whatever. But the idea is you can never have more than 21 million. Dash is similar. Dash has a limited supply of around 18.5 million for similar reasons, but also because the treasury function, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's a little different. And so this idea of, first of all, I want to just touch on the price. People see Bitcoin. Bitcoin today, what is it, like $8,200? And they think, how can I afford a Bitcoin? I don't have $8,200. Well, then buy 100th of a Bitcoin and pay 82. Buy 1,000th and pay 820, $8.20. We're so used to the dollar. The dollar is divisible down to the penny, right? The 1/100th. You can divide Bitcoin and Dash both down to the 1/100 millionth. You can make micro payments. And that's what's interesting about these. It's why they're scalable too. And this whole issue about having a limited supply is key. Because this is the central bank that we're used to. It's been around for 106 years. It issues all of our currency. And there is no limit. There is no ceiling. This is a graph from the Federal Reserve itself. It's a timeline, starts at about the year 2000, goes to the modern day. These gray vertical bars you see here, oh yeah, I got a laser pointer. These are recessions. These are periods of recession in the economy. This blue line is the creation of money. It's Federal Reserve balances maintained by Federal Reserve banks. See this little blip right here? This was unprecedented at the time. That was September 11th, 2001, the terrorist attacks. And there was like a huge multi-billion-dollar infusion to go to war in Afghanistan, and that was the highest that had ever been on this graph. We get right here, and look what happens. There's no limit to how many dollars you can create. It's probably no irony that Bitcoin is the first block is mined right about there. And part of this goes back to this man who, this president temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold in 1971. This is a screenshot, and think about that. The temporary suspension of the dollar into gold. There was a time you could trade your paper money and get precious metals. But it's been temporarily halted for 48 years, or as Eric Voorhees so eloquently put it in his debate with Peter Schiff, that's almost as long as William Shatner's film career. So back to this limited supply nature. So you have a cap on how many coins you can create, but how do they get created and how often? So with Bitcoin, the supply is created to go down by half every 4 years. And so this is how that works. The first block is mined in 2009. 50 Bitcoin are created. Every transaction block that happens about every 10 minutes creates another 50 Bitcoin. And you do that for 4 years. And then in 2012, there was a halvening event which dropped it down to 25 Bitcoin. So now you have 25 Bitcoin being generated with every block for the next 4 years. And then in 2016, it goes down again, and we're still in that mode, which is 12.5 Bitcoin every 10 minutes, more or less. Next year, there's another halvening. It goes to 6.25. 4 years after that, it's 3.125. And 4 years after that, my math's not good enough to know. But you get the idea. Dash is different. Dash has a supply that drops off more gradually. So rather than these big drops, which create opportunities for speculation and thinking, oh, the supply is going down, the price is going to go up. Dash isn't about speculation. Dash is about utility. Dash is about function. It's about digital cash. And so the supply goes down gradually. It's about 7% every year, more or less. Both use a proof of work for consensus, so there's mining in both. But with Dash, you have another second tier, which are the masternodes. And these are very cool. The masternodes, anybody can have a masternode. To have a masternode, you just have to have 1,000 Dash. At today's price, that's about 70 grand that you'd have to put up to have a masternode. It has to all be in one single encrypted address. And if you can prove that to the network, you can run a masternode, and then you can become part of the network and get some incentive to do that, which we'll talk about. The mining times, like I mentioned, Bitcoin every 10 minutes, you've got a block that gets mined every 10 minutes. Dash, it's about 2.5, so about 4 times faster on the mining time. And then this is really key. So with Bitcoin, all of that new Bitcoin goes to the miner, 100%. So if you're in a mining pool or you're a miner and you validate the block, you get all that new Bitcoin. You get all 12.5, and then you go for it for another 10 minutes, and hopefully you get the next one. And that's why you see these server farms, and they're chewing up tons of energy trying to get that Bitcoin. But it's all going to the miner. There's no incentive for development of the network. With Dash, it's split 3 ways. So with Dash, you have 45% of the block reward goes to miners, 45% goes to these masternodes. And if you're a masternode owner, there's about 4,900 of them right now, and they're anonymous. Somebody in this room could be a masternode owner. I don't know. They're generally distributed around the globe. It's one person may own more than one. Maybe a group of people own one together. They're anonymous, but they get to share in the reward. It's kind of a round-robin system. And then 10% goes to this DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which is the Treasury, which is very cool because this is what enables development of the Dash network. So today, that's about $400,000 a month at today's price of Dash that just goes to this treasury. that money is available for development of the network. Right now, about half of it goes to Dash Core Group Inc. And I have to make a very strong distinction. Dash is decentralized. There's no Dash CEO, there's no Dash building or anything like that. There are multiple development teams. The key core development team is called Dash Core Group Inc. It is a corporation. It is a C corporation, and 100% of the shares belong to the network. And the CEO can be fired at any time by the network if they don't like what the CEO or anybody else there is doing. But what's cool is that anybody for 5-Dash can submit a proposal to the network. So let's say I've got an idea to do a really cool, I don't know, like a point of sale. I've got some hardware device I want to build, and it's going to take about 300 Dash for me to pull this thing off. I can submit for 5-Dash, which is about $350 in today's price, to the network and say, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to make this point of sale system to benefit the network. And then the masternodes get to vote on that proposal. They get to decide, hey, that's a great idea. We want to fund that. That sounds really cool. Or they can reject it. If they reject it, I lose my 5-Dash. I put some skin in the game, I lost. But if I get the funds, I can use it for the development and I don't have to pay it back. And again, the Dash Core Group, the core developers, they're on the hook for this too. They have to submit proposals for their funding. They don't just get it by default. They have to submit a proposal like everybody else. And so talking about these masternodes, most recently, the last version of the software that came out had a new technology called chain locks. And this prevents the 51% attacks or chain reorganizations from happening. And the way they do that are through these long-living masternode quorums. So you have masternodes. There's about 4,900. And so what the network does is periodically, it will go in, because in Dash what happens is the miners produce the blocks, but the masternodes validate them. Okay, and so let's say you have a transaction block. What happens is 400 masternodes are randomly selected. And those 400 masternodes, 60% of them, whichever ones of them have the first scene of the first block, that locks the chain tip. So you don't have, like in Bitcoin, this massive network where you take 10 minutes and then you need like 6 confirmations, so your transactions are like an hour before you even have settlement. This happens in about 4 to 6 seconds, that these masternodes are able to lock in and say, that's the definite block for this chain tip. Any other chain that tries to have a different block at that block height, we're going to reject it. And so then that broadcasts out to the rest of the network and allows for this functionality. And then this is what enables the default setting for Dash, which is instant send. If we'll do this later. Is anyone going to the after party, the Rio Bravo? So come find me, download a Dash wallet. I'll send you a penny. And I can afford to do that because a Dash transaction, I can literally send you 1 penny and it'll cost a fraction of a penny. Try sending a penny with Bitcoin. You know, the fee might be 50 cents just to send a penny, or you'll wait for days. I think my longest Bitcoin transaction ever was in the height of that craziness. I waited 3 weeks for one to confirm. Instant send is instant. My wife, Bonnie, hey, sweetheart, we bought coffee at Pros and Roasters the other day. Took less than 2 seconds to settle the transaction. Boom. The merchant had the funds. The merchant can spend the funds right away. In the case of instant send, it's just 30 randomly selected masternodes. And again, 60% of those have to agree. And that's what enables an instant send of just a couple of seconds with Dash. And these settlement times are really key. So again, with Bitcoin, you're talking maybe an hour of real settlement, real trust, 6 confirmations on the blockchain. With Dash, you really do. You got about 2.5 seconds on average. You're right there with Visa. You're right there with MasterCard. And that's what enables real merchant adoption. That's why right now it's taking off, especially in Latin America. Dash is huge right now in Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, in parts of Asia, in Thailand, in Africa. It's wherever a currency is in crisis, wherever the currency is tanking hard, and you've got hyperinflation, this is doing fantastic right now. And I can go to, I can get on an airplane and go to Caracas right now, and I can live off Dash. I can take Uber rides. I can eat at restaurants. I can stay in a hotel because there are over 2,000 merchants just in that one place that will take it. And so don't expect this to really take off in the US right away, right? We have pretty good infrastructure for our own money. But in these places where it's a very different world that we can't even really comprehend unless we've been there, this is game changing. And this is what's going to allow for the mass adoption. And so I just kind of And going back to this ad where it's telling you to think of this as money, it's more than that. I'm telling you with Dash, you got to think of it as financial freedom. There's that freedom gap in the world. You know, yeah, there's regulation. Yeah, there's a need for all that. But there's also a need for the freedom to do with my money what I want to do. If I want to give it to somebody, like with cash, you know, what if I want to go to a place where my dollars aren't welcome? Well, I can use a currency like this, like Venezuela. Or if I just want to travel freely and not worry about thieves, you know, I can take the app off my phone. There's not even any proof I have currency, and then download it when I get to my destination and have that flexibility and have that freedom. That's what it's really about for me. That's why I like cryptocurrency is believing in that aspect of our freedom, and I think that's what this gives us. And that'll wrap up my presentation because I think we were going a little late. I don't know what time it is right now, but do I have time for questions or do we need to break? Okay, so if you got a question, shoot it out and I'll try to get to it. Yeah, somebody right there.
So you said the settlement time on blocks is 2.5 minutes, but the quicker Dash was 2.5 seconds. So how does that coordinate?
Right, so you don't have to, in other words, you don't have to have a block be mined in order to validate the transaction for settlement because the Masternode network is what is driving that part of it. So when the transaction occurs, there's basically a mechanism where the masternodes are able to say, okay, we have a consensus based on this quorum, that's the first block we saw, and so we're going to validate that block. And does that answer the question?
Well, not really, because if they approve it, and then you're handed your cup of coffee, and then something goes wrong, and then it never hits a block, isn't it not a valid transaction?
That's a really good question. You know what? I don't have a sword, but I got a tire iron in my trunk that I'll give you for stumping me on that one. I'll look into that, Tom. I don't have the answer to that. That's a really good question. Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, I get why we affected Venezuela and those kind of countries in that environment, but I've been a little intrigued by the fact that cryptocurrency is now being used more extensively in the United States for the legal marijuana industry. And that, given all the restrictions around cash, it's all cash-based, as you know. What's your thinking about why it is that in states like California and Colorado and Washington, that those merchants haven't moved to digital?
That's a great question about why the marijuana industry hasn't adopted this already. I think that's coming very quickly. In fact, Dash is partnered with another company called Alt36, which is for this very specific industry for that very specific reason, because this is a great use case. If you're in the marijuana business, that's a federally illegal thing to trade in. So even if you're in Colorado, you have to do business in cash. You can't receive payments through plastic. You have to have paper money. And to have paper money, there's a lot of expense. There's security. There's armored cars. There's you got to have a guy with a gun there in the store to keep people in line and all that. So Dash is partnered again with Alt36 for that very reason, to make these transactions happen on the blockchain. And don't stump me, I only have one tire iron. But it's the same kind of deal where it's not violating federal regulation to do it in Dash. You can do it in Dash on that front end with the consumer. So I can walk into a cannabis store and pay with Dash right now if they accept it. And the merchant can take that and go through a third party like Uphold, who can then convert it back into fiat on the other end. So you don't have that whole transaction of dealing with and handling physical money. Am I done, Bill? Have I got to?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll be around later.